What's up, everyone? My name is Cordell, aka Hot Cocoa, and today I'm going to talk to you about how I recorded a whole forest. I turned it into a sample pack. I'm going to show you what I thought about when I was out there in the woods, how I collected some of these sounds, some techniques for processing it, and really I'm going to encourage you to go outside, touch some goddamn grass. Let's do it. So I love being in the studio, it's one of my favorite places, but I needed to get out of the city. So I went across the whole nation, deep into the Black Forest, Germany's biggest and oldest old-growth forest. I did a 2-week solo backpacking trip where I went deep into the mountains and decided to record all the coolest sounds that I found. And I'm going to show you how to do it. I like to think of it, instead of sightseeing, I was like sound hearing. So every time I heard something cool, I would whip out a field recorder instead of a camera. Although I whipped out a camera as well. I used my trusty Tascam DR22WL with a windscreen, necessary ingredient if you're going to be recording outside. I've wanted a fancier field recorder for a while, but after recording this sample pack, I'm really impressed with this bad boy. So honestly, use whatever you got would be my first bit of advice. So some of you don't know this, but in addition to being a musician, sound designer, and creativity, psychology educator, I have spent a long time as a naturalist and an outdoor educator. I used to do whitewater rafting and rock climbing and taking people on backpacking trips, and just being outside to me is a crucial part of being creative, which is why I'm making videos like this. And so I've got some of the experience and background to be able to go out into the woods. I spent a long time as a wilderness first responder, but you don't have to have all that experience to get outside. There's a lot of different types of guides and tours and more simple, less rugged environments that you can get into. Outside is accessible for everyone, no matter your color, or your background, or your nationality, or your culture. You are a person of the planet, and so exploring it is your birthright as a mammal. And of course, beyond that, beyond the recreational aspects, it's just got a lot of cool sounds out there. You can record organic, natural, textural sounds when you actually get out into an environment. And since we are creatures of the earth, we respond differently to natural textures than we do to digital textures. Obviously, I think digital textures are cool if you've heard any of my music. But these natural textures, when mixed in with an arrangement, can add a whole different layer of depth that you just can't get any other way. So that's one of the best reasons to go outside and record something in your area. Okay, so the first primary technique that I use that you can practice is what's known as deep listening. This is when you're actually putting all of your attention on exactly what you're hearing. And this works especially well in outdoor natural environments. I wasn't listening to other music. I wasn't listening to podcasts. I didn't have any other sounds going on. Most importantly, when my attention would wander, I'd have ideas and think about the past and the future. I would notice that and then bring my attention back to what I was hearing. This was especially hard for me as I was hiking, because what I noticed after being out there in the woods alone for so many days is that music would play in my head, especially music that was the same tempo as my hiking pace, which I found was really interesting. But what I had to do was notice that I was playing music in my head and then put my attention back on what I was hearing. This is a crucial practice for deep listening. It's essentially a mindfulness practice that places you directly in the present moment through the sounds around you. So there are a couple different ways that you can look for sounds when you're outdoors. One way is more like sound hunting. So if you have really specific sounds that you're going for, like I need to hear a horse gallop, right? And then you go outside and you're hunting for a specific sound. That's a great way to do it. I was trying to be a little bit more goal diffuse. I was just being receptive and open to whatever was coming around me. And so I kind of thought of this as less like sound hunting and more like sound gathering. Like gathering berries as I come across them. Anything that I found was interesting as I was doing this deep listening, I would then pull out the recorder and collect some of that. So along with this deep listening, what you can then do if you want to record natural organic textures is to decide how active or passive you would like to be with your recordings. When I say passive recordings, this is what would be considered like non-interventionist, in which you're not doing anything to intervene or to make changes. You're just listening to what's actually there. So in my case, like a babbling brook. I'm not splashing around. I'm not throwing anything in there. I'm just recording what's happening as I find it. Same with the birds. I'm just recording the birds. I'm not chirping back. I'm not like feeding them or provoking them in any way. I'm just passively recording what's actually happening. This is really nice because since I'm getting out of the city, I'm getting away from other people. I'm looking for really specific natural sounds, and there's a couple specific types of natural sounds. One is called biophony, which is just sounds that are coming from creatures. So like a lot of these bird recordings I got are a perfect example of biophony. In this case, just listening to the birds around me would be a passive, naturalistic recording of biophony. There's also geophony, which is specifically looking at things that are coming from the earth. So like recording streams and rivers is really good. I also recorded rocks, but the rocks are hard to record naturally, passively, non-interventionist. So I had to get a little bit more involved. This brings us to more active recordings where I'm getting myself in there. This is interesting because in addition to biophony and geophony, there's also anthrophony, which is just sounds that humans make. So this is stuff all around us like cars and ambulances and people talking. It's just human noises. So that's part of the reason I was going out to the forest, is to get away from all this anthrophony. But natural environments can be really quiet. And I've struggled with this in the past. I'll go to beautiful places and there's not a lot of sounds to record, which is really peaceful, but not great for a sample pack. So this time I decided to add in just a little bit of anthrophony and intervene, get involved using these naturalistic sounds. Little pebbles and little stones, picking them up, rubbing them around in my hand, getting all these really cool textural noises. It's a mixture of geophony and anthrophony. I found these massive stones, and to be honest, I did have in mind somewhat of a goal. I knew I wanted a lot of percussive sounds, and I thought these big stones would be perfect for kick drums. And I was right. And so I picked up these huge stones and just chucked them onto the trail. Massive. So if you're going out to a natural place, you want to practice some deep listening and then record some of the things that you're hearing. Decide if you want to do some active stuff where you're getting involved. Decide how much passive stuff you want to record where you're just accepting whatever sounds you want to have. And like I did, you can do a little bit of both and figure out which sounds work best for you. Another necessary part of getting your field recordings, whether it's active or passive, is doing what's called tagging or front loading the sound, which is saying what it is and usually when you recorded it. Stick on stump, April 2025, Black Forest. Black Forest waterfall, April 2025. Babbling Brook, Schwarzwald, April 2025. This is really helpful because a lot of field recorders don't let you label things on the fly, so it'll just be numbers and letters. And so when you're going back through and listening, it'll help you figure out what all of this random stuff is. Once you've recorded all those sounds, you get to get into the magical world of file management. This is the sexiest part of the whole process because it's the most necessary. You got to take all of these sounds off of your SD card and do something with them. So I took everything off the SD card, dropped it into Ableton, chopped out all the silences, labeled everything, and then started to go through and figure out where the juiciest parts of each recording is. I then did some light processing just to make sure there's clarity and everything is like popping out. I didn't want to go too crazy because depending on the composition and the performance, that's where you would dial in the final details. But I did want to make sure that all the samples can really shine on their own without needing too much processing immediately. There were a few key plugins that I use for this. The first one I absolutely love that was necessary for this sample pack is just called Denoiser. I'm pretty sure it's free, and there's actually a few different ones of these. They use a really cool algorithm that somehow figures out background noise, and you can attenuate the background noise by specific frequency bands, so you can dial in exactly where it is. This is helpful because the windsock here does a lot of work, but it doesn't do everything, and so the denoiser helps with getting a lot of that extra background noise that made it through the wind filter. EQ, of course. A lot of the samples I'm cutting out a lot of the low end because that low rumble just isn't necessary for a lot of sounds. Sometimes it's cool, like when I recorded this waterfall. That low end might be helpful at some point. But a lot of it, like recording sticks and stuff like that, I don't need the low rumble of the forest or the wind around me. Compression, super handy, especially if we're trying to get these textures and those little tiny things when we're doing the pebbles and the rocks and things like this, the crunchy leaves. So a little bit of compression and then raising the gain, the makeup gain, so that a lot of that textural stuff comes through. Sometimes I'd use a good old-fashioned drum bus to get those transients out a little bit, maybe push the drive, normalize things a little bit. But yeah, here's the process that I went through to actually turn this into a sample pack. Once you've figured out exactly what the sample is and you've processed it a little bit, you're gonna freeze and flatten that bad boy. And then you can right-click, show in Finder. Sometimes if you freeze the track and you've got multiple things on there, you might hit Command J to consolidate each of those, in which case you can still right click and go show in Finder. No matter how you do it, you got to take all your processing and all your chopping up and flatten it down, whether that's in clip mode where you crop it, or consolidating or freezing. Those are the three kind of main ways to do it depending on your workflow. But once you've done that, you want to go show in Finder and then drag all of those things into a separate folder and then label them there. That's my workflow, at least. If you did all of those steps right, you should end up with a beautiful sample pack. I didn't even think I recorded that much stuff. It was just, like I said, every time I noticed something cool, I would record something, and I ended up with over 150 samples of this bad boy. I've already made a whole track using only these sounds and a little bit of bassy wubs, you know how I do. So make sure you're subscribed so that you can check out the next video where I'll break down how to make music with all of these noises. If you're like, no, I'm not going outside, I don't need to touch all that grass, and you just want these sounds for yourself, you're in luck. You can join